I usually get questions about how to get into McKinsey. Instead of giving you gyan about things in general, I break it down into very simple steps.
Pramath Raj Sinha. He's the OG institution builder of India, one of the founders of ISB, Young India Fellowship, Ashoka University, Vedica Scholars Programme for Women, the Naropa Fellowship, and before all this, he was a partner at McKinsey and helped scale their India practice.
All of us, even the best qualified, the best trained, the people with the best credentials, have faced significant ups and downs in our career. And you will face that. I mentioned I was working at McKinsey. I was there for 13 years. Somebody gave me a job. I loved the idea of doing that job, and I went there. It was a disaster. And then I was out on the street. There were articles in the newspaper about how, look, here's the example of another consultant who couldn't get it done in the real world.
Hi, Pramath. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so right off the bat, some studies show that the more educated you are, the higher the likelihood of you being unemployed. How do you think we should solve this problem?
Lot more people go into higher education when they don't need to. They could have actually jumped into a job right out of school or college. But then they bide their time doing another degree, another master's. We are going to talk about MBA, I'm sure, at some point. These have become a substitute for employment, but at the end of the day, they still come out and at some point need employment, and we are not creating enough jobs. There are lots of studies to also prove this, that, that India needs to grow at 12% in terms of GDP growth if you're going to meet the demands or cater to the supply of young people who need jobs. And even though we are doing very well, we are the fastest growing economy, we are in the 6-7% range. So that gap is between the 6-7% and the 12%. And that has been there for years now, is what creates this perception that our people are not educated enough, or the more educated you are, you don't get jobs.
Where does the onus for this lie? If there aren't enough jobs being created, who should take ownership of that? I know it's a bunch of people. There have to be governments, businesses. Do we need more entrepreneurs?
The onus at the end of the day, Nikita, really lies on the government. I do think that given that we are a democracy, given that we are in a tricky situation because we can't completely unleash and free things up without protecting certain sectors, certain segments of our population. So it's a fine balance, and that is what doesn't allow us to be as aggressive as we need to be to make some of these changes from a government or a politics level. I believe that some of this has to do with paying the price for being a democracy. Some people would love for us to be like a China, where you just order and by diktat do things, which is how they got to where they have. I think that's impossible to do in our country. And to that extent, we value our system, our democracy, our freedom so much that I think we've been willing to accept, at least those of us who are somewhat more privileged, have allowed this situation to continue. But it does affect those who are on the wrong side much more. As you can tell, a lot of the inequities have actually gone up, even though we have brought more people up from very poor levels. The truth is that the divide between the rich and the poor continues to grow, and we haven't been able to fix that to the extent that we should have been able to.
Now, because that problem is so big, if I as an individual have to solve my own, problem and have to optimize for a great career, I will make decisions for myself. And sometimes the answer to that, whatever I may be doing immediately after graduation, oftentimes the answer is I'll do an MBA. But now even that's not good enough. We've seen so many numbers, even the topmost B schools in the country are having problem with internships, with jobs. So now the problem is twofold. We have a tough market, and from the face of it, it seems that it's tougher for generalists than specialists. But we know from your book that you have a contrarian point of view. What recommendation would you make, especially to people who are going in for MBAs but then not able to get the kind of jobs they think they deserve?
Again, when you talk about job, obviously we are affected by what is happening right now. And it's very immediate, it's short term, it's here and now. I need a job, I have a loan, I have family to take care of, I need food on the table. And in the near term, this is a real problem. If you don't have a job, if there's a downturn, if you're not getting internships even. When you talk about career though, and if I can cheat and answer that question, I think if you have to think about your career, then you have to play the long game. And that's the point I make in the book. And that's the side I am on. Because, all of us, even the best qualified, the best trained, the people with the best credentials from educational institutions or places you worked, have faced significant ups and downs in our career. And you will face that. Long term, is doing an MBA good for you? I think it still is. Because what the MBA does is that if you're going to work in the corporate sector, it gives you that broad perspective that you need to work in the corporate sector, which most people who don't have an MBA don't have. And ultimately, it's the human drive, ambition, spirit, curiosity that counts. It's not so much a degree. But it's also true that a lot of people who do MBAs are successful, and you can't deny that. So my view is that these ups and downs are temporary. If you have a good education, if you have good fundamentals, if you've been trained well, if you've really learned from your experiences, at least in the India of the next 30 years, you're not going to have a problem getting a job. I'll give you a live example. It sounds preachy to say what I just said, but when I graduated with my PhD, I thought I'd done a decent PhD. There was a downturn in the United States. There was the Gulf War that was going on. I had no control over these events. But there was a downturn not just in the US, but across the world. There was a widespread recession. You all are too old to remember that, but I'm talking about 1991. And I couldn't get a job. And I was shocked. It hit me hard that as a person who had gone to a top institution in India and a top institution in the United States, there weren't enough takers for me. And so I went and got a job in a university in Canada, and I kind of landed on my feet. But look, because I was an international person there anyway, I literally had to go to another country to find a job with the best of credentials. So all I'm saying is that these ups and downs will happen. When you are in that situation, you feel terrible. My parents were worried. They were like, my son is not getting a job. He's getting married. How will he manage? All of this, it creates huge anxiety, and I understand that. But you have to take a long view of your career and have the confidence that, listen, we are all very lucky to be in India at a time when opportunities are only going to grow. And that these are near-term changes that you will have to overcome.
And in your book, you argue that, STEM versus non-STEM in the long run doesn't really make that much of a difference. Even if you're from a non-STEM background, you're likely to earn the same if you just take a longer time frame. So then, does it really matter what you study at all in college?
At some level, I think it doesn't. It does and it doesn't. But it is also true that if you don't specialize or if you don't study something, you will still be successful. I think a lot of people become anxious because they don't know what to do. They don't know what to major in. They don't know what to specialize in. They're not sure. And it creates unusual pressure on them, their parents, their peer groups, that, oh, how come Simran doesn't know. And by the way, your sister knew. Look how she has done, and how come you don't know? And the assumption is that therefore you will have an unsuccessful life and that you will be unhappy. I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody saying, I want to be a lawyer. I'm going to take the CLAT exam. I'm going to go to a good law school and I'm going to be a lawyer all my life. I think that's great. I think it's great that people say, I want to be a doctor. It's great that people say, I want to serve the country and I want to go into the army or the air force, or I want to join the civil services. I think it's also okay for people to say, I want to make money and be an entrepreneur, or I want to do some social service. I think all of those things are great if you know and you're willing to put your money where your mouth is, or your actions where your thought is. I think that's fantastic. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm not against STEM or specialization. But I'm saying if you don't, it's okay. It's not the end of the world at all. You still have the chance to do as well as the next person who seems to know exactly what they want to do. That's the only thing I'm saying. I'm also saying that if you think you know what you want to do and you do it, and it turns out that you don't like it, or there's a setback, or a new opportunity comes up that seems more exciting, it's okay to make that switch. You'll still be fine. And so I'm trying to liberate folks from having to choose and or be stuck, uh, so that they don't feel that way, that they don't feel anxious about it. That as long as you are curious, as long as you are learning, as long as you are growing, you'll be fine.
So since 2019, I've been meeting between 100 to 300 students, MBA students every year, and I talk to them about, what they want their career post MBA to look like, what job are they looking for, how they want to project themselves, and what's the difference between that and what they've put on their CV. But one of the questions that I get a lot is, I want that 30 lakhs job. Tell me what I should do so that I'm prepared for it, and tell me what I should write in my CV so I get shortlisted, so that I get shortlisted for it. And so everybody's worldview, is limited to getting that most high paying job. It's competitive and everybody wants to know the right keywords, the right technical skills, and the right soft skills. I also understand that the reality of some of these students is much harder than mine. They have huge loans. Some of them have to look after their parents. There is a monetary goal that they have to achieve, and sometimes I feel that it might even be disingenuous to offer hope when even I know that jobs, especially like this, are quite limited.
Yeah. I worked at McKinsey, and every MBA student wants to work at McKinsey. They want to do, if not McKinsey, some management consulting. Sometimes they use the language strategy consulting or just consulting. That has always been the case. I think I first heard about consulting when I went to do my PhD in engineering at UPenn, where Wharton was a big business school. And all the Indians who went to Wharton all wanted to go to McKinsey. There was an undergrad business program, they all wanted to go to McKinsey. I usually get questions about how to get into McKinsey. So I'll tell you how I deal with this. And instead of giving you gyan about things in general, I break it down into very simple steps. Number one, of course you should try for McKinsey. Here's what McKinsey looks for. Here's how you should project yourself beyond your CV. This is what you have in your CV, in your background, that could work for McKinsey. And by the way, remember that McKinsey is very, very competitive. So I'm not saying you don't have a chance. Everybody has a shot. Who am I to decide? Let McKinsey decide. But be prepared that you might get rejected, because the chances of getting in are difficult. There are many other consulting firms if you are really clear about consulting. Then I say, listen, while consulting seems like a great job, not everybody is suited to be a consultant. I would like to play IPL cricket for India. I would like to, or rather World Cup cricket for India. But there are certain things inherent. Maybe, of course, it's obvious today I'm too old, but I'm just not good enough in many ways. And it doesn't mean that I'm not a good enough person for other things. People are meant for different things. So recognize that you may not make it to consulting, and that's not the end of the world. Now, if you're going to consulting, which is my third point and your important point, that you need to make a lot of money, please understand that you can't dictate how much money you can make. There is a market out there, and you studied about this in the MBA program. There's a clear economic model out there. It's a marketplace. And how much you're worth will get determined by who wants to buy you and how much are they willing to pay you. That clearing house, or that price point at which you get bought, and I'm using harsh terms to make the point, is what you are worth. And there's again nothing wrong with that. It's just a starting point. All of us built out from that starting point. So instead of saying, I want that 30 lakh job now, you may be confronted by a situation where you can't get that 30 lakh job now. You may only get the 15 lakh job now. And I know it's going to be tough on you, but please be assured that in 5 years, you will be making so much money that you don't know what to do with it, and probably much more than your parents ever earned throughout their life. So I think that's what I normally tell people, just to give them the assurance, but also helping them be a bit realistic about their expectations, because you know and I know that not everybody is going to get that consulting job, not everybody is going to get that McKinsey job. That is why that job pays 30 lakhs, because it actually just cherry picks the best people by making it very attractive.
To interview prep, say if you were interviewing candidates, what do you look at?
When I interview people, I generally look for people who are interesting and people who are interested. Now, that seems like a cute one-liner, but I genuinely mean that. In judging how somebody is interesting, I look for people who have some sort of drive and ambition. I think the biggest thing that drives or motivates people to do well is their personal intrinsic desire to do well, to be. So it's good to be ambitious, to have drive. And I think that is something that I look for. I like to know what do they want to do, why do they dream to do what they want to do, and I think that is interesting to me, to understand people's dreams and aspirations. I also look for people, and that may be a reflection of my own career, who are generally curious, who are willing to explore, who are willing to deal with ambiguity, uncertainty, and have dealt with failures, have recovered from them. They don't see that as showstoppers. And of course, I generally look for people in the interesting bucket who seem to get on with people, who get along with people, who are able to be curious in the lives of others and therefore naturally have respect for others, for their views, who bring in empathy, collaboration, all of those nice things that we look for in a team. So those are some of the things, and the more you break it down, it actually boils down to usually the checklists that you have on the forms when you're interviewing, which typically says, is this person a problem solver? Are they strong analytically? Do they communicate well? Are they actually good collaborators and team players? Do they have some sort of a drive and ambition? So it breaks down into the same set of criteria that you typically see, but I bucket into my way of saying, is this an interesting person? Would I love to have them on my team? I think the interested part is also important. I like people who come in having done some research, some due diligence, some reason for why they are here. In fact, it's a big personal turnoff when it turns out that, oh, I just applied and I came for this interview. You're from the YIF, and often we do, I not so much anymore, but I used to do YIF interviews, or I do Ashoka interviews. You have people who are clueless about the university. And I'm like, yeah, you may have 99%, and I'd love to have you in the university, but weren't you curious before you came here to find out a little bit more about what is Ashoka, what is happening here, why is the YF unique, or what interests you? So I think a lack of interest really turns me off. And I expect that people would have done some work before they came into the interview. So those are the two broad buckets that I look at.
But in India, it doesn't matter whether you're applying to an entry level job or a VP job. The number of applicants are so large that HR and business people, everybody is overwhelmed. So, how does one solve the problem of access? How does one even get an interview in the first place?
So I don't have an answer for you. I usually, it's been a long time since I was at the coal face, as it were, to do that filtering. I'm sure all of those keywords and those positioning kind of things make a difference in being shortlisted. But I will also tell you that people ultimately see through all that. So, yeah, if you don't embellish what you do enough, then you might lose out on making it to the shortlist. But it's also true that just embellishing it for the sake of looking good will be seen through sooner or later in that process of filtering. So I would say that don't be too modest. Do go out there to make sure that you actually project yourself. But don't worry about other people getting ahead of you just because they are better marketers or use better keywords. I wouldn't stress about that. I would rather invest the time. See, a lot of people actually underplay themselves. And that's the bigger problem, because you're not investing enough time in thinking through how, what are the unique things that you bring. And I see this universally at all levels, since you talked about multiple levels. I'll give you a very quick example, and I think this would be a great tip for anyone. One of the first questions that are asked of people is, tell me about yourself. And most of us start by saying, oh, I'm Pramath Raj Sinha. Well, people already know your name. Is that the first thing that tells you that this person is underprepared? Then you start walking people through, oh, I did this, I went this, I worked here, I worked there. They already have your resume. This is an opening for you to control the conversation. Have you thought about what 3 qualities about yourself you're going to hammer home during the course of the conversation? Now, this, I'm giving the example of an interview, but that starts from well before you even send the resume. And I think that the resume then starts to reflect these things in the way it is written, not the keywords so much. So if you are great at execution, does every aspect of your resume highlight your ability to execute things? If you're great at people and that's what you want to highlight, does every aspect of your resume, your cover letter, all communication highlight that, your LinkedIn page? So I think investing in really thinking through what is the best that you can bring to the table that is authentic and genuine, and really playing that up and structuring it in a way that people can't miss it, is where I would focus. Ultimately, otherwise, all the embellishments and the high sounding words and led this and achieved that and this percent growth and that percent cost reduction and so many millions of dollars of impact, people see through that. In fact, often when I see those numbers, I'm like, okay, why is this person trying to oversell themselves. So it can cut both ways.
So there is the anxiety that young graduates or even people who've just finished their postgrad or MBA have, which is when you're entering the job market. But now I sense a lot of fear and anxiety, even people who are many years into their career and have well-paying jobs, even in specialized fields like in project management or product managers. Everybody feels AI मेरी job ले लेगा, अभी नहीं तो 5 साल में ले लेगा. Are we overestimating the power of AI, or is the answer just constant upskilling?
I think constant upskilling is the answer. I will confess to you, I'm a daily user of AI, and I use it for everything. It has made me far more productive. Uh, it has improved the quality of my thinking and my output. I almost have a thought partner constantly available to me. And I don't know if it's taking anybody's job who used to work for me, but it certainly improved me. And if you look at it from that lens, then I think it would apply to everyone. I think instead of feeling threatened by it, we should really learn how to use it. And by the way, it is very intuitive and easy to use, much easier than learning how to use PowerPoint or Excel. Let me tell you, it's conversational. So I would actually encourage everybody to reject this theory that your job may be taken. Your job may very well be taken. And by the way, every time there's a technological disruption, jobs are lost. Now, instead of crying over that and going into a anxiety because you don't know what is going to happen to you, I would say quickly upgrade yourself. And by the way, you don't need to understand AI and how it works. You just need to start using it. And it's as much as we all love using Google and Google Maps, I mean, it's become part of our unthinking, unconscious reaction to anything. There will be missteps. The best of us have disruptions, setbacks, failures, shocks, mistaken decisions. And I can give you examples from my own career. I did my PhD. I told you I joined a university in Canada. I hated it. I suddenly realized that I was not cut out for an academic career. I had to do a complete shift. I mentioned I was working at McKinsey. I was there for 13 years. Somebody gave me a job. I loved the idea of doing that job, and I went there. It was a disaster. And then I was out on the street. There were articles in the newspaper about how I had just been in that job for 18 months. And while people respectfully did not ascribe a failure to it, the tone was very much that, look, here's the example of another consultant who couldn't get it done in the real world. I've started businesses that have failed, that have not scaled up. I've started education programs that have been a complete disaster. I've actually had to shut them down, request students, faculty to move on, and it's been some of the most painful experiences of my life. We all, and I'm not trying to win brownie points here or show I'm humble and all that. We all go through these ups and downs. So people have to understand that, of course, you have to take responsibility. Of course, you have to drive your own career. Nobody is going to give it to you on a platter, even with the best background, qualifications, education, track record. You have to constantly, actively manage your learning, your personal growth, and career opportunities.
In our mission to explore how different stakeholders can be accountable to making not just the Indian, but maybe even the global workforce future ready, would you like to nominate the next guest on this show?
Well, I'm now part of Upgrad. So I think somebody like a Ronnie Screwwala or a Mayank Kumar, who are co-founders, would be great people to talk to. I also think that since you asked, and I was just conversing with her this morning, one of our Young India fellows started this organization called Swa Talim. Somebody called Ananya Tripathi, who's also done a PhD now in the US. And Swa Talim has been very successful in enabling people from rural India, women particularly, to skill themselves up at that level. I think at both ends, you can actually talk to people like that.
Thank you so much. We'll place an interview request and hopefully we'll get it. Thank you again.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.